Thank you, everybody. So a little bit about me. So I'm Shane Thomas. I'm a senior developer at Third and Grove. So I've also created a website called codekarate.com where I posted lots of different videos. So if you've ever watched Drupal 7 videos, you might have seen some of them from me. I do some Drupal 8 videos as well, not as much as I used to. I'm also the maintainer of the Gatsby Drupal module, so we'll be talking about what that is. You can follow me on Twitter at smthomas3 and additional skills unknown. Maybe you'll find out some if you talk to me. So Third and Grove was founded in 2014. We're almost to 50 people, I think. I think that number fluctuates. We're spread out. We're a distributed company. We're always hiring, so if you are a dev looking for doing some cool work, we work with really large brands. I think the 6th largest nonprofit in the world. We work with Quicken and Mint.com, so a bunch of different big brands. If you're interested in that kind of work, we're always looking for great people. So today, we're going to be talking about introductions. We did that, Gatsby and Drupal in an overview. So who here is familiar with Gatsby? At least has heard of it. Okay, so most people have at least heard of it. Now hearing about it and actually doing something with it, of course, are different. So who's actually either tested or done something locally with Gatsby? Because that'll kind of gauge my... So not very many, just a little bit. Okay, so good. So we'll start kind of at the entry level. You will see some code today. If you're not that familiar with modern JavaScript, it's going to look a little weird, but it'll still look like JavaScript, right? So it might, if you just know that if it looks a little off, it's okay. It's kind of your first impression. It's going to be that way. Once you see it a little bit more, it'll become much more familiar, and it'll all start to make sense. So I already did that. So Gatsby is a free and open source framework based on React that helps developers build blazing fast websites and apps. Okay, so that's kind of the textbook definition. ReactJS or React is a JavaScript library for building user interfaces. So you're going to hear these terms. You've probably heard them before. We're just going to kind of go over the definitions and you'll start to see them in action here. You're also going to learn about GraphQL. So the cool thing about GraphQL, you've probably used SQL to query a database. GraphQL is a query language for your APIs. So you can query all different types of sources using one structured language, and you can pull data from a bunch of different places. So it's really cool. Gatsby, you'll probably hear something called the content mesh, or you may have heard of something called the content mesh. It's basically a way for you to have a website that might pull data from Drupal, might pull data from Markdown files, from a Shopify site, where all these different data sources, a spreadsheet maybe, so you have all these different places you might store data, and you want to pull them in and consolidate them into one single website. And GraphQL is that language that can go up to all those different places and pull in that data. So there is a common misperception with Gatsby, and something that I've heard talking to a lot of developers, well, Gatsby's great for static websites, but it won't work for my website because it's not static, right? I have something that needs to be dynamic data. So just keep in mind that Gatsby is a framework for building progressive web apps. It's not just for static websites. It starts as a static website, but what happens is once you load that page the first time, you get static content, and React is rehydrated through the application, which essentially is just a fancy way of saying it's a React app. So anything you can do in React, you can do in Gatsby. So if you wanted to pull in live data, one example is you may have a shopping cart, right? The price might change based on certain conditions. So maybe everything on the page is static, but that pricing component is loaded dynamically from a server. So that price changes. You go to the page, the price is up to date, up to the second. But the rest of the content doesn't change very often, so it's just statically built. So just keep in mind, it doesn't have to be just a static website. So anything you can do in React, you can do in Gatsby. In fact, I would argue if you're going to work in React, you probably should just start with Gatsby. In a past presentation, Next.js was also an option, but you pretty much don't really need to start with just a basic React app. Use a framework like Gatsby or Next to really get a good base and a lot of that configuration built for you out of the box. The cool thing about Gatsby, if you're coming from the Drupal world, is it's very similar to in Drupal. I really love Drupal because you can grab modules and just piece things together. Well, Gatsby's kind of the same way. There's plugins, there's a plugin ecosystem, there's themes, which are similar to plugins but a little bit different. But you can basically piece them together and you can build out a Gatsby site It's a little different than how you do it in Drupal, but it's going to feel similar. If you like the idea of I can install a module and it works, and I can piece things together, Gatsby plugins, you're going to require a little bit more code, but it's the same kind of feeling. So one of the questions is, isn't my current CMS good enough, right? I've spent all this time learning Drupal. Why do I need to learn something else? Well, it might very well be good enough. Drupal's great. Drupal's great for a lot of things. I still build, majority of my work today is still in Drupal. But there are more and more use cases where you might want to still use Drupal for a back end, but just have a different front end. So you have that more modern feel. So when your customers go to their website, it feels like a native application. So when you pull up a phone and things just are smooth and everything feels intuitive and fast, Gatsby can give you that feeling, and it doesn't feel like a website, it feels like an application. So there's a lot of reasons why you might want to try it. I would argue performance is the best reason. It's very easy to build a high-performant website. If you go to the Third and Grove website, for example, it's built on Gatsby, and I'll show this, with a Drupal backend, and it's 100 performance scores in Lighthouse. So, you can build very performant websites as long as you can build slow Gatsby websites, but it's hard. I think the quote is, it's hard to build a slow Gatsby website, where when you're building websites in Drupal, you're working really hard to try to make it as static as possible by adding caching to try to make it fast. So it's hard to make Drupal fast. It is possible, but it is more difficult. It's harder to make Gatsby slow. But I've seen slow Gatsby sites too, so you got to just pay attention to it. Okay, so let's say I've convinced you now. You all look convinced. So let's keep going. So if you want to use Drupal as a content source for a Gatsby website, it's probably really complicated, right? What do we have to do? Well, install Drupal, turn on the JSON API module, and that is it. There's nothing else. If you want to just test it out, that's all you have to do. So if you have a Drupal 8 site, turn on the JSON API module, and you can get started. As far as Gatsby, there's a lot of online editors you can use to test, but if you want to install it locally, install the Gatsby command line tool, run Gatsby new project, install the Gatsby source Drupal plugin so it can talk to Drupal, and that's it. So you either use NPM or Yarn, which you may be familiar with if you worked with any node type projects. But essentially you're just adding a plugin to your Gatsby website. And then we'll configure that plugin here in a second. So we're going to go through and actually look at some live code. And again, don't feel bad if it looks a little weird to you. It's a little bit different than what you might be used to. If you worked with React before, some of it's going to look familiar. If you haven't, you're going to understand quite a bit of it. Just know that some of the little syntax stuff will look a little different.
Do you install a module in Drupal, or does it sit alongside Drupal?
So yes, that's a great question. So you'll have your Drupal site, and then you'll have your Gatsby development server, which is probably just running locally, but you could run it in a Docker container or wherever else you want to do your development. Typically, I'll have my Drupal site, and then I'll just be running Gatsby locally on my local machine. So yeah, what Gatsby is going to do is there's a couple different things. So the whole process, the way Gatsby works, is there's a build process. Because it does generate a static site, what it does is you run your Gatsby develop command, which we'll see. It's going to go out to any of the different content sources you want to pull from, whether it's Drupal, Shopify, whatever. We'll just say Drupal in this case. It's going to pull any content in that you need. It's going to create all those static HTML pages. It's going to process all the images. It's going to build essentially a bundle that is your website, and that's a static website that you could then upload to some type of static hosting service. The one thing you'll see and we'll talk about is hosting a Gatsby website's cheap because it's just static HTML. You can do it for mostly, honestly, the Third and Grove website is hosted for free. We don't pay anything. It's just hosted on Netlify's free plan, and it powers our business website, which is pretty impressive. So just keep in mind, if you're just hosting static HTML, the hosting costs go way down. Now there are other considerations, but it has to go through this build process. It builds the static HTML, and then the static HTML eventually is going to be deployed to a server somewhere. That's kind of the way the life cycle of that process works. So there are a few files we'll look at. The Gatsby config file is how we actually configure our Gatsby site. That's how we tell it to talk to Drupal, because we need to tell our Gatsby site, well, this is our Drupal URL to go get the data from. Our Gatsby Node.js file is what runs, that's the file that runs at build time to pull in any of those different pieces of content that we may want to build into our Gatsby pages. We use GraphQL, which you're going to see, which is just that query language to go out there and get that data, and then there's React components that kind of permeate throughout your application. So before we look at some code, if you go to codekarate.com, I have basically this site that I'm going to show you. It's this Gatsby site. I have videos on how I built it, so you can see, I think there's 9 or 10 videos. If you want to learn how to use Drupal and Gatsby and you want to see their step-by-step, I think there's probably an hour's worth of content. It doesn't really take that long if you want to get just some basic example up and running, but there's 9 or 10 videos. All right, so let's do a live demo. We'll see if it works. If it's anything like the microphone was when we came in, this could be risky, but let's see how it goes. So we're going to demo Drupal and Gatsby. So just a quick setup. So I have a Drupal site, and I'll probably try to make this a little bit bigger here. So this is just a D8 demo Umami site. Well, it's not a good start. There we go. So we have just the Umami site, and I have a Gatsby site here. So I'm just going to run Gatsby develop, and we're going to look at what the code's doing eventually. But what this is going to do is it's going to run out, it's going to run this GraphQL query and pull content in. We'll let that run for a second. So let's look at how it's actually doing this. So here is, I'm just going to close all of these so we can start from scratch. So here's my Gatsby site here. There's a source directory, which I'm going to have a bunch of different files in. That's where your JavaScript that kind of powers the application goes. But at your top level root, you're going to have a Gatsby config and a Gatsby node.js file. There are some other things, but those are kind of the important ones that you want to pay attention to when you get started. So my Gatsby config this is just your configuration data about any plugin that you want to install in your Gatsby site. So we have our site metadata, which is just kind of your meta tags that are going to be part of your site. You have any plugins here. This is just JSON, so it's just plugins. It's an array of different plugins that you have. So I have this plugin called Gatsby Plugin React Helmet, Gatsby Source File System, which allows me to pull in images, a couple other things here. This is the important one right here. So right here, I am telling it, okay, I've already ran my npm install Gatsby Source Drupal, and now I'm configuring it by adding this into this config file. So all it's saying is it's going to be the Gatsby Source Drupal plugin with this option. The only option I need to pass it is what's the URL of my Drupal site. Now, there is authentication you can do, so you can make it behind a username and password if you want. I kept it really simple, but it's if you go to the Gatsby Source Drupal documentation page, you'll see that there's an option for a username and password. So if you didn't want to make your content public to the rest of the world, so it's just pulling it in from this dev Pantheon site that I showed. So that's just all of that's doing is making the connection. Right now, the connection's there, so I can use it. And this Gatsby node file is where the magic actually happens to build these static pages. Okay, so this is run. As I mentioned before, that initial build has to go out and pull in this data. So you can see, if I look, it normally tells me how many pages. So it created 16 pages here. And if I go to this site, this is just the main page, but I also have an articles page, which we'll look at, and you can see that any of the articles that are on this site, you can see here, give it a go and grow your own herbs, was listed right there. So you can see the articles are getting pulled in from that site. Now, how is it doing that? Well, that's where this Gatsby node file comes in. So let's go through this. We'll kind of go through it pretty quickly. Feel free to stop me if you have questions. We have until 3:30, right? That's correct? Okay. Just want to make sure I have the timing down. So this Gatsby node file, what it's doing is we can essentially skip down to here. That's where the real meat of it is. It pulls in this create page think of it as a function call. So you can this is the function that you use to actually create a page in Gatsby. You can dynamically create these pages, and it's running this GraphQL query. So this GraphQL query is going to look a little funny, but all it's doing is saying I want to get all the node articles. I want to pull the title and the path. And Gatsby gives you a really cool tool right here called Graphical that allows you to essentially go out and query your different content sources. So this is pretty small. Let's see if we can make it a little bit bigger. Is that a little bit better? All right. So you can see this is all the data from Drupal. So if I wanted to pull in, let's say, all node articles, I simply click there. You can see it's building this GraphQL query as I go. I want all the nodes, and let's say I want the title. I'll go into the body field and grab, the processed body field, maybe the ID, and let's get the path alias as well. And all I do is hit the play button. You can see over here it's pulling in the JSON data. So you can see here's the title, there's the body text, the ID, the path alias. So it's pulling all that data in. So all I need to do is just copy this here, drop it into here, and then that query is going to run and pull whatever data that I saw in that editor into my Gatsby site. So then when this runs, I get this, essentially this array of articles here, and I just map that or essentially loop through it. And for each one of those, I'm creating a page. What am I creating? Well, I'm creating it at the whatever alias I give it in Drupal. So that way my paths in Drupal match up with my paths on my Gatsby site. What component am I going to use? So that's just a React component we'll look at. And then what information do I want to pass into that component? I'm just passing the ID, the article ID, because I might want additional information passed in eventually. So I'm just passing in the ID, and then on that component, we'll actually pull in any extra data we want. So this means, knowing this right now, means that if I were to go to any of these articles here, it's only going to work with articles that are in English, I believe. So give your oatmeal the ultimate makeover. So if I were to grab this path, and I were to drop it in my Drupal site, it is going to, it should be available, right? Because that's, and you can see it is. So how is this actual page getting generated? That's where this component comes in. So you can see right here, we said source templates article.js. If we follow that path, source templates article.js, here is the component that's actually going to create this page. So you can see it's a little bit long. One thing keep in mind with Gatsby, and you have this build process that runs this GraphQL query. All I'm really grabbing right now is I want to grab the path alias, the title. Actually, I don't even need the title, the path alias and the ID. Because then in this template, down here at the bottom, I'm saying, okay, pass this ID in and pull all the extra data I want. And the reason I'm doing this, you could pass it all in from that one query and just pass it in to your component. But the reason I'm doing this, and you'll see later, is because you need to follow this kind of pattern if you want live preview to work. And so there is a little bit of a pattern that I'm following, and I'll show you how that works here in a little bit. So you can see here I'm pulling in some additional data, the title, the body, the alt tag from the field image. Any image data is actually pulled in through relationships, so any of your entity relationships are going to show up under this relationships key here. And I'm pulling in the URL from that image, and then that'll pull in the URL and do some processing on that image itself. This is going to look, this is just a React component, so if you're not familiar with that, this is React. It's essentially just returning this information here. So we have an H1, the title is going to be in that H1. We have an image, it's going to have the source and the alt text that are pulled in from our GraphQL query. And then we have a div where we're just dangerously setting this inner HTML to whatever is sent back from the Drupal's body text, right? And that's all there is to this page. I mean, it's just H1, the image here, and then the text. And I don't know if you'll be able to see it since it's already loaded, but one of the great things that the Gatsby, so I'm not using the Gatsby image component here, that's actually a good point, but on this other page, I believe I am. So the other page I want to show you is that you can dynamically generate Gatsby pages, but you can create any other Gatsby page you want. So in the home page, this is just a home page. There's also an about page here. Those are just pages in the pages folder. So we have this about page. It's very simple. It has an H1, says hi, and it has a link back to the home page using the Gatsby link component. So that's just this page. So if you want just static HTML stuff, drop that in. And if you want a more listing page, what you typically use views for in Drupal, I have an articles page. And here is my GraphQL that pulls in limits to 10 articles. It pulls in all the different article data I want. And it's essentially going to loop through or map through those articles and create this article preview component, which if you look here is going to be under components, article preview. So I'm kind of going through this a little fast, but essentially it's just React components that you kind of piece together like Lego blocks. So this article preview is essentially just what you'd call in Drupal a teaser. So it's just a teaser in this format. There's a link. Uses Gatsby image. And if I go back to /articles, you might be able to see it, but it kind of blurs the image at first and then loads it after. So it gives you that by default. So where it doesn't actually need a load. If you have 100 images, if you have a huge list, it doesn't load all that right away. It loads a really slim, blurred image, and then in the background, the JavaScript will load the actual image. The other really cool thing that I like to do on a Gatsby site, if you go to the Network tab, it might be a little hard to see, but as you can see how things are coming in as I go. And it'll actually prefetch these links as well. So it'll prefetch the HTML for those links. So when you click on it, it's already loading that. So you don't have to wait for that page to load. It might already be there. So it feels like an app-like experience when you do that. So that was a very, very quick code example of that. But for time's sake, we'll keep going. I do have this code available on GitHub, so if you go to GitHub, it'll be a link at the end, but that code is all up there, so you can take a look at that, see how it's all set up if you want to actually pull it down and run it yourself. So one of the problems though with this is anytime I wanted to change content on the Drupal site, I would have to rebuild Gatsby, right? So if I wanted to change an image on my blog post and just see how it looked with the rest of the blog, I would go into Drupal, change the image, then I'd have to come back here, shut down my Gatsby develop server, and then I have to rerun Gatsby develop, which could take, depending on the size of your site, might take 20 seconds, could take 10 minutes. A content editor doesn't want to wait 10 minutes to see a change. So one of the things that Third and Grove's been working on, along with some of the other Gatsby core team members as well as some other agencies, is how do we solve this problem, right? How do we get so there's more of an intuitive preview for content editors? So we came up with live preview for Gatsby here. Let's see if I can. So this is an article on the Third and Grove site. This is using Gatsby's preview service. And if we go here, and I'm just gonna, because I don't want them to come in here and deploy this, I'm just gonna make a really simple change. I could change the color, I could change any of this stuff, but I'm just gonna do something simple in this one. So if I save it, and if this preview is still running, which maybe it's not. Oh, there you go. So you see, I didn't even have to refresh the page. It changed this is just a blog, essentially just a blog post, right? All I did was edit the content on Drupal, click save, wait a few seconds, and normally it's much faster. For some reason, I think the build time on this is a little slow for some reason right now. Might need to be restarted. But you can see it loads in, it changes. So anything you change in here or on the Drupal side will immediately be previewable over here on the Gatsby side. And this is a live demo of the site. I don't have to just go to this page. I can go to any page, and it'll load in. Yes.
So is that constantly watching? Yeah. From.
Yeah. So this is so think of this as kind of like a staging site. This isn't the live site. This is just a staging site. But essentially, what it's doing is it's running a Gatsby development server on the cloud for you. And when you save it on the Drupal side, it's sending the JSON immediately to that Gatsby server. So it just posts that JSON to the Gatsby server. The Gatsby server knows how to read the JSON and then update the site accordingly without having to do a complete rebuild.
How efficient is that? Is it expensive? Not necessarily money-wise, but to constantly.
So it's just like running any other server. You're just posting to it. So this is using the Gatsby preview service, which has a free trial but does cost, I think, $50 a month. But the cool thing is you can do this locally as well. So if I were running this Gatsby develop locally, as long as I get the networking set up right, which is tricky, but if my Drupal site can talk to my Gatsby develop server over port 8000, you could run this in the cloud locally. You wouldn't have to use Gatsby's preview service. Gatsby's preview service is an easy way to, you can pay for it, you don't have to set up any of the networking stuff, you don't have to worry about that. But it's all open source, it can be used in any fashion as long as you get the networking stuff set up. So let's talk about Gatsby preview and how you actually get that working. So we went through the Third and Grove site. There's videos just in case my demo didn't work, but it did, so we're good there. So how do we set up a live preview? Well, in this example, I'm using Gatsby's preview service, so that's just gatsbyjs.com. I would also encourage you to go to gatsbyjs.org. They have really good documentation for if you're just getting started. But you go to gatsbyjs.com, you create an account, you create a new site. If you already have a Gatsby site pushed up, all you need is it connected to your GitHub account. You point it at a repository, so I could just grab a Gatsby repository here, click next, and that's all you need to do from the Gatsby Cloud side of things. It's really easy to set up. You just have to have basically it uploaded to GitHub. It can be private, it doesn't have to be public. So from the Gatsby side of things, it's easy. Now from the Drupal side of things, so I have another test site here. Let's close down and let's go back to this test site. So there is a Gatsby Drupal module. We should have had that pulled up. But you'll just need this Gatsby live preview module. And all it does right now is live preview. There's some other things in the works with incremental builds that'll be coming here shortly. But essentially you need this module installed on your Drupal site. You'll go into configuration, Gatsby live preview, and you'll configure it to point to your preview server. This could be a local server, remember. For now it's Gatsby, it's on a Gatsby Cloud, but it could be running locally. So if I tunneled into my local and I provided, the ability to get to 8,000 over some kind of URL, I could just point it at that and just run it locally. I use ngrok. If something like ngrok can allow you to tunnel into your local environment and send a link to anyone in this room if they wanted to see the site I was building locally. So you could use something like that and it would work. But here we're just pointing at this Gatsby preview site, which I think is right here. As you can see, that's just that Gatsby preview site. So that's all I need to do on the Drupal side. Then on the Gatsby side of things, you just have to kind of follow that same building paradigm where you just pass the ID into your template. You're not pulling all the data in your Gatsby node file, and it's just going to work. So let's go ahead and test it out and make sure. Yeah, so if we go here and I go to /articles, this will be a good test actually. And we go into content. Let's see if we can change this. Maybe we'll make this bold. And then we'll go down and click save. And fingers crossed. You can see it changed it. Didn't change the text. That's interesting. I wonder. Oh, it's because it's just a preview, it's a trimmed text. But you can see even on the listing pages it changes it. So it's not just changing it only on this page. Here you can see it's actually bolded, but it changes it in your lists as well. There are some caveats. If you do things like pagers and things like that, it's not necessary. If you add a new article, it's not necessarily smart enough to update the pagers. So it's not perfect, but for a content editor who wants to be able to see if their blog post looks good before they hit the publish button, this is a really good way to allow them to do that. All right, so let's keep going through here. All right, so before I go on, this is only one, this is kind of solves the content editing step of the process. There's also the deployment step of the process, right? Because after the content editor sees it, they have to be able to actually deploy it to a live site. So if you use the build hooks module, you can actually set up deployment with Netlify, so your content editor can make a bunch of changes, click a button, and it'll ping Netlify or other types of hosting environments, static hosting environments, and they'll pull in and automatically build your site. So your content editor can do all their editing, click a button, and then 3, 5, 10 minutes, however long your build process takes later, it'll actually be live. So it's a little bit more difficult for them to get it live, right? Because they have to go through that build process, but they can see it all beforehand. So at least they know, okay, when I click live, or when I can see it looks good, when I click the deploy button, it's going to take a few minutes, but it'll eventually be out to my live sites. So just keep that in mind. There's kind of that intermediary step. You have the editing experience, but you also have to figure out the deployment problem, which the build hooks module does help you solve. And the build hooks module is pretty configurable too. You can have it automatically deploy every time you save an article. I think that's a little dangerous because you can't see it until you click the save. So I typically like to let them preview it, make the changes, and then click the deploy button later. So what's the future of live preview? Because this is just the start, right? This is kind of something we've been working on for a while. It works. There's still, it's still kind of in a beta mode. But the folks over at MediaCurrent have been working on a more integrated editing experience. So you can see down here, there's kind of a preview button. That'll open the preview. It's a little bit nicer. This is the Rain installation profile, I believe is what it's called. So it's kind of built to work as a decoupled site with Gatsby. So there's some nice things about the preview button. Also, when you click save, this is essentially an iframe or an embedded preview from either the Gatsby preview server, or if you had a local, locally development running server. So it's more like the Drupal experience. When you click save, you don't want to have the Drupal markup look really strange and then have your preview somewhere else. So it kind of pulls in the preview right into the Drupal editing experience. We also have plans to integrate with Drupal's content moderation system. And the reason behind that is so we can eventually do something like this, which this is a demo from about 4 months ago. But this is what a lot of the other headless CMSs have. And you can see as you're changing the title up on the top, you have the preview on the right, and it's immediately, keystroke. There'll be this is a little bit, I guess there is a little delay. There'll be, kind of like a debounce after you stop typing. It'll send the data, but it'll be more of a live experience. And then eventually, we want this so you don't have to have two windows open. It'll be right within Drupal. You can configurable, of course, but you can have the iframe showing up on the right. You can have the editor on the left. As you change it, it's changing your actual page or the preview living on Gatsby's preview server or on your local development server. So that's the future. That's still a ways away, though, so don't get too excited. There's a lot of work to do to get there. But for some review, looks like we have a few minutes, so we'll have some time for questions. Gatsby isn't just for your static sites. That's the common perception. Just know that it's really great for static sites, but if you have stuff that's dynamic, it can do that too. There are some struggles, like authentication is a little tricky, but it is possible. Just know that the first time you have to do some of those things, there'll be a learning curve, right? Just like anything else in our world. The Gatsby source Drupal plugin is what powers the Gatsby site to talk to your Drupal site. You use GraphQL to actually query it, and then you just display your pages with React components. So if you know React, or if you learn a little bit of React, this is going to all look very similar. It's just, at the end of the day, Gatsby is just, some APIs built on top of React is really the way I look at it. So So if you're interested in helping out, definitely test out some of the Gatsby stuff. Test out Live Preview. It's still, like I said, in kind of a beta mode. It works, and there are some companies using it, but this stuff's all kind of new, right? You've probably just starting to hear about Gatsby more and more, so you could definitely use feedback or just tests, anything like that you want to help with. And then if you do have questions about any of this stuff, the Drupal Slack is great, especially the Gatsby channel. I'm in there. The founder of Gatsby, Kyle Matthews, literally answers questions in that pretty much every week. So you have access to core team members and the founder himself and other developers like myself that are interested in this kind of problem, and we want to see it succeed because we like it. It's a lot of fun. Honestly, I can say, when I first started playing around with Gatsby, it was just a fun development experience. It reminded me of the days when I started, pulled up like Notepad and you're just typing HTML, and anything you type, you can immediately see the results. It's just a fun development experience. Unlike, I love Drupal, but onboarding, going from Drupal 7 to Drupal 8, or when I learned Drupal 6 10 years ago, it was a little bit of a hard experience. It was painful, right? There are times when it's painful. This, to me, it's not without its pains, of course, but it's a much more pleasant experience. It makes building for the web fun again. At least it did for me. So here's a bunch of resources, and I will post my slides after this. I will also tweet out the link. So if you want some of this, the Drupal modules here, the Gatsby source Drupal documentation, the link to Gatsby Cloud if you want to use the cloud service for preview. I have the demo on GitHub, or the actual Gatsby site that I used. You can find bunch of videos that walk through exactly how I did it on codekarate.com. Also, the Third and Grove website, so if you go to thirdandgrove.com, that's a Gatsby site. We open source that code. So if you want to see how we built it, because we think we did a pretty good job, but we know there are ways we can improve. So we're always looking for, if you're building a Gatsby site, you want to get some inspiration, reach out, ask us questions. We're hoping to improve it for everybody so we can have more Gatsby sites and make the web a little bit faster of a place. So thank you, and I have some time for some questions.
Sean, after we talked last night, I went back to my room and fired up Doxel. I do a lot of development in Doxel, and I was really pleased to see there's a Gatsby JS pre-select there for Doxel, so you can spin up a Gatsby server
in
in a couple of minutes.
Cool. Yeah, that's good to hear. Yeah,
I think I discovered one in Lando too.
Yeah, I know there's quite a bit of good Docker support for Gatsby as well. So if you don't want to run it locally, you can run it inside a container environment pretty easily. Cool. It's good to hear. I haven't used Doxel myself, but I've used Lando a little bit. Any other Gatsby questions or any questions? Yeah.
What kind of performance, benefits are you seeing in the case of a normal, call it a Drupal site? Assuming you don't have varnish in front of it, every time you hit a page, Drupal's going to have to bootstrap, and to handle page load, you have to scale. With a Gatsby solution, you able to scale with less resources, or what do you kind of that by?
Yeah, so Gatsby, essentially, since it's static, Gatsby's just living on a CDN, really. So you have a static hosting environment that just pushes out your content to a CDN. So if you hit the site, you're just going to the nearest kind of CDN, pulling the data down. So it doesn't have to do any of that bootstrap process because it's just static HTML. So out of the box, and if you run, a Lighthouse or a Google PageSpeed or whatever your performance tool is on like the Third and Grove site, for example, it scores 100 on performance, where the traditional Drupal 8 site is probably going to be between 40 and 75, maybe, depending on how good you do setting up all the caching, and depending on the scale of your site. So just based on strictly performance itself, you're going to get huge wins that way. Now, of course, you still have to be careful. You can build a slow Gatsby site, but it's much easier. I'll say this. I don't know. I've never seen a Drupal site score over a 90. Maybe it's happened, but it's be very, very hard. It would take you a long time. If you start a Gatsby site just out of the box, it's going to be in the 80s or 90s just automatically for you. So as long as you are careful in what you're doing. Yes.
Are you seeing people choose Drupal for a Gatsby site with, like, if they have no legacy, like, say there's no previous Drupal site that, you know, makes it easy to go to Gatsby because you already have this infrastructure, but if you have nothing and you're starting, are people picking Drupal? Or
From what I've seen, it's still kind of new, but no, I haven't seen it. I've seen Drupal agencies pick Drupal because we're really good at it. There's a lot of headless CMSs out there right now that are very simple, and they're good. Some of them are really good. But the problem that I've found is they're very good to a point. For the basic use case, if you're building a very simple marketing site, a very simple blog, they probably work just as good, maybe even better, simpler than Drupal, right? There's less setup. But if you're building anything that's relatively complex, where you have maybe a couple different user roles that need to access different parts of the site or do different things, Drupal still wins, in my opinion, in that regard. And so I know the Gatsby team. So Kyle Matthews is the founder of Gatsby. He used to work at Pantheon, so he is pretty invested in the Drupal world. So he puts more effort, I think, a little bit more effort towards the Drupal side than some of the other CMSs. At least he seems to care quite a bit about it. So I think some people will maybe come into Drupal stuff, or Drupal will for more complex stuff, but I haven't seen it yet because I just haven't, it's still relatively new. But the headless CMSs have kind of, you've probably heard a lot of them, like Contentful and Netlify CMS and Sanity and Ghost. So there's all these other ones popping up, but I still think Drupal has a place kind of for those more complex use cases. Yes?
So a friend mentioned it's not just for static sites, and maybe you talked about this and I didn't quite pick it up, but if you've got something like I think the example you used, wasn't it, was Tim that talked about shopping cart data or something changing dynamically. I mean, so what I saw, I was like, okay, if I go and I've got my blog post, I hit save, that regenerates the page.
Right.
But if there's other triggers, right, there's some other dynamic content, how does that
Yep. So the way that it would work is, let's say you have a product page, right? Let's say we're building an e-commerce site, we have a product page, and I'm using Gatsby. I might be using like a third-party cart. So I'm using like a BigCommerce or Shopify cart or something like that, right? But I have the product pages that are built in Gatsby themselves. And most of that content is going to be static and not change every day. The things that I do care that might not be static would be the price, maybe the stock. Maybe I show the stock, or at least I want to show if it's out of stock, in stock or out of stock. So in my template, I would generate all that stuff that's static, and then I'd probably have a placeholder. Maybe it defaults to whatever it was when it was build time, but then when the page loads, JavaScript will run, and it's just using React. It will go out to my server somewhere, wherever that server is, pull in the new price, the current price, and the current stock, and then update the page when the page loads. So if you are a customer visiting the page loads right away, immediately, and then the data that's live that I don't want to be out of date could then get pulled in dynamically after page load. JavaScript would go out and do that. And that's just using React. Any other questions? I think we're just about on time. Cool. Well, thank you.